if you are in a relationship with someone who is not growing, looking at the power dynamics that we're actually maybe unconsciously engaged in, which I call them codependent hooks, realizing that if you have to stop growing to accommodate someone, you're dying.
Yeah.
Like you'll resent them and the relationship will implode.
Hi, welcome to Plenty. I'm so excited on this episode to be on location in Los Angeles interviewing Mark Groves, who is the founder, the creator of Create the Love. He is the co-author of Liberated Love with his amazing wife. He has the Mark Groves podcast, and he is a real truth teller about the nature of love, the nature of relationships, but really the nature of the human experience and how we can live more aligned, more deeply in integrity, and therefore more alive. So if you have been desiring more love in your life, plenty of love, then this is the episode for you. Enjoy. Welcome to Plenty. I'm your host, Kate Northrup, and together we are going on a journey to help you have an incredible relationship with money, time, and energy, and to have abundance on every possible level. Every week, we're going to dive in with experts and insights to help you unlock a life of plenty. Let's go fill our cups.
Please note that the opinions and perspectives of the guests on the Plenty podcast are not necessarily reflective of the opinions and perspectives of Kate Northrup or anyone who works within the Kate Northrup brand.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to know, because I don't know you that well. I've just been getting to know you in the last 24 hours. Well, a little bit with voice memos before then, but like really, for real.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that you were put on this earth, and maybe you don't believe this, but like to talk about love? Like you have a real gift with
Thank you.
Relationality.
I like it.
Okay. Relating.
It's a verb now.
At least talking about relating. And I have been relating to you in the last 24 hours. I think you're good at it. So why you? Like what happened in your life that set you up for this to be your quest? Love. Quest love.
I like it.
Didn't mean to do
that. I've always been really curious about the human experience, like why we do what we do. I didn't know I was so like, that's not how I would have labeled it when I was young. But when I was like in grade 4, so like 10, 11, 12, you know how social structures start to be created in school. And so I watched a social structure being created and me not going up the social structure. And that caused me to have a lot of pain. I didn't know what was happening, but I experienced that I was not feeling as much belonging. Then I found that I was like anesthetizing that with the introduction of sugar. And I didn't tell people there was like not that my parents wouldn't have listened to me. It was like this internal process that I was going through. And then in grade 8, I lost a bunch of weight. Not in a healthy way. My grandma used to take Slim Fast. Do you remember Slim Fast?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember learning about it, which of course it probably had high fructose corn syrup and all this shit.
Definitely not good
but
for
it
you.
like expanded in your stomach or something and made you feel full.
Okay.
And here I am in grade 8 thinking about this. And thinking about how like I would self-deprecate a lot. I didn't feel like I fit in. And my brother was really fit and he mountain biked a lot. So that summer I mountain biked a ton, but I didn't really eat very much. And I would take my grandma's Slim Fast. I would like sneak it, which is crazy to think about. And then I lost a ton of weight and I went back to the first day of school and all of a sudden I got a ton of attention. And I remember thinking as I was getting that attention that I was still the same person. And so there was like part of me was feeling really sad about that.
Yeah.
And I had a grade 9 relationship. This isn't going to be like a story of my relational life, but I had a grade 9 relationship that lasted a week and she was great. I actually interviewed her on my podcast.
That's so fun.
Yeah. I'm doing an ex-girlfriend series.
Really? Oh, that's good.
Because I feel like I've had the microphone this whole time and they've never had a microphone. And so I'm like,
whoever's willing.
Yeah, because I'm sure one of them, I'm like, she probably won't. But when I had a conversation with her, she's a great friend. She's married to a good friend of mine. And we were talking about it. And after we broke up after that week, which I was very much in love with her.
Yeah.
And, you know, I heard a friend of mine's kid when we were at a playground together. The other kid, he told a little girl that he loved her at the playground and they had just met. And the other parents said, oh, that's so cute. He thinks he loves her. And I was like, he doesn't think it. He does. Yeah. And isn't that so interesting that we like project that it must be after a certain time? And anyways, we sort of judge love based on its time, but you can have fleeting experiences that are filled with incredible depth and incredible pain.
Yeah.
And that was that for me, Michelle. And I listened to End of the Road from Boys to Men after that. Oh, that's a good one, eh?
Wow.
That one will fuck you up. It's a good thing Adele wasn't around when I went through that. Because Adele, man, hello. Even though that was about her dad, that's still.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Oh.
I might be wrong, but I think it was.
That's good for all of us with daddy issues.
Right.
I'll re-listen.
But after all that, I didn't talk to her for a year and a half.
Wow.
Because I just didn't know how.
How big was your school?
Small.
So that was like an accomplishment to not.
Oh, yeah. Like we would be in a circle with like 8 people and I would just ignore her. And I looked back and I thought I had so little access to expressing my pain that I just bottled it all up. And the way that I communicated it to her was by punishing her, which she had the right to not want the relationship. And although I did feel misled and there was some validity to that, I kind of walled up a little bit and then had a girlfriend in high school who was great. And I used to sit on the couch with my dad and talk about relationships. He would ask me questions about, we would very much like explore the human experience, still do. Wow. And so I have very fond memories of that, but he would ask me about what I was doing, who I was being. And that really just like made me think about things differently. And I was in sales after high school. I worked at a place called Future Shop, which was like the Best Buy of Canada.
Okay.
But it was also like the 40-Year-Old Virgin. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yes.
Yeah. So we would like wear suits and sell extended warranties, and we were like heavily trained on closes. Like I learned 9 closes, how to close people in 9 different ways in my first training. And then, so I was like I loved learning how to manipulate human behavior. And then I got a job in pharmaceutical sales, which I've since karmically been repairing that. But I learned so much doing that.
Yeah.
And I was obsessed with understanding that. And when I went through a breakup in my late 20s, and I'd say even in my earlier 20s, before I dated a woman for 5 years, I was really interested in like reading books like The Game or How to Get Anyone to Do Anything, because I was so terrified of being heartbroken that I wanted to learn how to control every aspect of relationship I could and how to get a girl to not leave me.
How to essentially avoid pain.
Yeah.
Right. Turns out you can't, but.
Yeah, it turns out that's a facade. And no matter how many skills you learn to present as having high self-worth, you will always come back to who you truly are. And so it's like in conflict, your low self-worth will be evident, your lack of healing things. So that's where it really began when I ended an engagement in my late 20s.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, all these like behaviors, all these protective, I'd experienced betrayals in high school and in university from partners that I'd never really looked at. And I saw that I ran away from so many women who really wanted to love me, who were good. And when I ended that engagement with a really great woman, I was like, how did I get here? How do I never get so disconnected from myself again? I felt like I hadn't been living my own life. And yet, of course, I was making decisions, but they were like, what am I supposed to do? Who am I supposed to be? What kind of job am I supposed to have? And it was really the first time I ever thought, who am I really? And I read the book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I'll never forget where I was when I was reading it. And it was the first time I ever thought that I'm here for something else. And of course, as it happens, the pain that I had became my obsession to understand. And then as I was learning about relationships, I read A History of Marriage by Stephanie Kuntz. And I was like, oh my God, I've been lied to my whole life about marriage. I had no idea. I grew up Catholic. So I was like, oh, you get married by 27, you have kids by 30. Now that's probably all like had inflation too. So that's like 32 and 40 or something. And I was just like, holy shit, like relationships end all the time. Why do they end? Why do some people stay together forever and love each other? And why do some people stay together forever and hate each other? And why do some people break up and others not? Like, what differentiates really good, powerful lovers from ones who are not? Yeah. Because I wanted to be one. And I think I always had a deep desire for great love. But it was very naive when I was young. You know, my girlfriend was asking me the other day, like, we were talking about my ex-girlfriend series. Oh. And my wife, sorry. She was saying.
Oh, I was like, okay, I'm like, we're circling back.
I got a side chick.
Are we doing monogamy? Which is also fine if you're not, because I actually am curious about your take on the monogamish movement. But anyway, we'll come back.
Yeah, we can get to that.
But you don't have a girlfriend.
I do not. I just call her my girlfriend and my wife, which is by accident. And
I like it.
But that way she gets to play many roles. I'm polyamorous with my wife.
Within one relationship. Highly, highly recommend.
Right.
Mike and I were actually saying the other day, like how many marriages are in a marriage.
Right.
Like I am not the same person Mike married. He is not the same person I married.
Right.
Like we are on a new marriage. We're on at least our third.
Yeah. I mean, my wife and I have been through a few iterations and now having a kid, a new iteration. Marriage. Yeah. And, it's already hard enough to manage one life, to keep it on course, but to try to keep two together on course just requires like a deep level of communication and that like I am committed to walking that path as best we can together. And if at any point she wants off that ride, that's her choice. And if I do, that's our choice. But I don't see that happening anytime soon because she's the best ride or die.
That's awesome.
To find a human who's willing to do the work with you, that's all you need.
Yeah. It's so true. It is so true. It's really common in my community. And I know in the communities of friends of mine who are in my similar industry, I guess we could like loosely call it women's empowerment, though I don't love that phrase. But anyway, something comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Which is I'm growing and doing all of this work and my male partner is not and then women get afraid of outgrowing their partner. And it comes up a lot specifically in my community around like, they're really healing their money stuff. They're really dissolving the lie of scarcity. And yet their husband is like deeply committed to 3D reality of like, it's just math and the money's already been spent.
Right.
And like, like fear, lack, scarcity. There's no such thing as manifesting. Energy is not real, which is just not true. But like, what would you offer? Because like I answer them, but I'm also a woman, right? And I am married to somebody who is just as committed to his growth as I am. Like, there's no way it would have worked otherwise. So I'm not like the best person to help in that scenario because I'm like, I don't know. My husband's growing all the time. So like, sorry, maybe you married the wrong one, but that's not a helpful thing to say to people. So
it could be true.
Like, I don't know. It could be true, but like, what's your insight of it? It's a generalization, but what's your insight about that dynamic of the woman like doing the work and working on herself and healing her stuff and men not? And is there anything a woman can do in that situation to encourage, or should she just keep her eyes on her own paper?
A lot of layers. The first one I'll say is that, when the greatest reason relationships fail is they fail to create really clear agreements at the beginning.
So true.
So, when most of us enter partnership, we actually don't even know what an agreement is. We often don't even know what we really want, or we're afraid to claim it. So a lot of people who got married and are now 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, they got married without really clear discernment about what they were creating. They got married because they felt they were supposed to. Bless you. They got married because they felt that they were supposed to, and it was the right thing to do. And all that, that's why it's like, it's never the wrong person till there's the ownership that it's the wrong person. Because even if you marry, quote unquote, the wrong person, it is the opportunity to claim that truth. So you have to, in order to actually know what right is. So this is like the beauty of contrast, and so like everything that someone has that you don't want indicates what you do want. But most couples, when they fight, the person actually leads with the criticism, but behind every criticism is actually a desired behavior. So instead of you don't do this, it's like, I'd actually really like this. And I think we often don't give the solution to the person because we want them to just get us. But we're already pretty complex. And so to just have someone to assume they get us is very different than that they're curious about getting us. And I think the other layer to this is that a lot of men are still living in the perspective that they don't have to do anything in relationship. They've kind of inherited that from the patriarchal structure, that the dad just got home and dinner was at the table and kids are to be seen and not heard. And
he got to be grumpy because he made the money.
Right. And there's so much, and so I have so much compassion for men because I am one, in that like we were not necessarily empowered to, we inherited that system, and we can either try to benefit from that oppressive way of being, but no one benefits. Like men fail in patriarchal structures too because they're not actually seen. And so 70% of divorces are initiated by women. Yeah. And by the time a woman leaves, it's been about 2 years. But I think that would be true for any male or female.
Yeah.
So the effort's been made. So by the time she walks out the door's gone. It's gone. It's done. And so I wrote this article years ago that was called Love Her Before She Leaves You. Because this whole idea is like, yeah, I could write that to women, but really it's like, I'm actually going to write to the 70% that are left. And that could be true. It's just like, instead of getting defensive that I focused on men and that, just read the article appropriate to your own experience. It doesn't fucking matter. But people just want me to validate that they have the right to their suffering, which of course you have the right to your suffering. I don't get to do that. So if you are in a relationship with someone and you're growing and you feel like you're outgrowing them, there's a few layers to this, which is the first one is that you get to decide when does compromise become self-abandonment? So like, what is the line of time that you've negotiated with your soul that is the right amount of time, and maybe you're way past it, that if they don't change by, and most people who don't change so now their words are not matching, their actions are not matching their words. And we'll often hear people say, if believe his actions, not his words. No, anytime there's a mismatch, red flag. So if words don't match actions or actions don't match words, we have a mismatch. So that's integrity is gone. So people can't trust someone who says they're going to do something and they don't do it. So rooted at the basis of the relationship is a lack of self-trust. If I stay in a relationship with someone like that, I won't trust myself. And so it starts to show up as anxiety and depression. And then in psychology, it might be called learned helplessness. That you get to this place where you just don't feel like anything can change, but it's only because you've actually gotten into a functional freeze state. So now, of course, we're benefiting from that, or else we wouldn't do it. And so we're probably avoiding conflict, probably avoiding the perspective that we feel like we might have failed, because we correlate relational endings with failures. But they're not. No, and that's a reclamation.
Just done us a disservice.
Right. And women especially are taught that the sort of significance of their worth is holding the family system together. Now, the other part that is just like maybe the deeper layer that lives at the sort of codependent nature of a lot of old patriarchal structured relationships is that if I feel like I am emotionally more advanced and I'm growing and they're not, I'm starting to create a hierarchy in the relationship. And so often what happens when we do that is we actually don't want to be met, because to be met would be to be vulnerable.
100.
Because I see this other side, which is like men doing deep emotional work, becoming actually incredibly emotionally fluent. And then when a woman meets this man in this heteronormative sense, is like
Totally.
because they're not in the driver's seat emotionally anymore.
Right.
And they're being called forward.
Totally.
When they used to be like, you're never enough. You're always watching football. You're never doing this. And it's like, how would you relate to someone if you related from health? Which is very different, because what you'll see a lot in codependent relational dynamics is like one person will be sick, the other person will be healthy, the one person gets healthy and the other gets sick. Because they don't know how to relate to each other without someone having a need that needs to be solved. And often it's just one person who's always needing to be healed and the other person always suffering or always taking care of them. Because who am I if you don't have something I need to fix, then you're going to leave me.
Right.
And
need to be needed in order to feel worthy.
And you need me to feel better. So you always have to have a problem that needs to be solved, and I always have to be solving a problem, because who are we without these familiar roles, which of course comes back to family systems and childhood. And so if you look at sort of traditionally based on evolution, the woman tends to be the one problem solving and the man tends to be the problem. Now, in my wife and I's 1.0 relationship, she was the problem and I was the problem solver. Which actually, I think at the core, and I'll just finish on this, at the core of so many people, I was in relational work, am in relational work. At the core of people in therapists, coaches, service providers, doctors, nurses, dietitians, name the thing you do to help resolve people. At the core of that is a survival strategy.
Yep.
So you developed a hyper-vigilance, excellent skill. People come to you just by accident with their problems, and they just come to you and share it all, and you're fucking good at labeling it. And so when you start to monetize that, you actually don't liberate your clients till you resolve the need to be needed by them. So all that to say, if you are in a relationship with someone who is not growing, looking at the power dynamics that we're actually maybe unconsciously engaged in, which I call them codependent hooks. Also realizing that if you have to stop growing to accommodate someone, you're dying.
Yeah.
Like you'll resent them and the relationship will implode. The last question, which I think is really just a good one to ask, is if they actually changed everything, would you want to be with them? A lot of the times the answer can be no.
And then that's that.
Yeah, because, at the end of the day, it's like, if you're not bringing each other more alive, then your relationship is not in service of each of you.
Are your parents married?
Yeah.
Really? That's amazing. Rare.
50 years in January.
Are they happily married?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, they got their dynamic.
Yeah, everyone does. I mean, everyone's on their journey, but
I'd say like, if their son wasn't deep in the world of relationship, they'd be considered objectively very happy.
Cool.
And they are. Cool. But yeah, I'm like the guy who's like, hey, I noticed this pattern with us. I'd like to resolve it. And they're like, here we go. Yep, let's go, Mark.
You say that to them.
Yeah, because
They're just always bringing up stuff. Not always, but like when it's relevant.
Initially I was.
Yeah.
Which, whenever you're deep in the work and then all of a sudden you're like, I got to bring this shit forward if I can, if my family's safe to do that.
Yeah.
I resolved a money thing with my parents because when I was I think I was probably in grade 3, I was probably 8, and I asked for a transformer for my birthday, and my parents got me a GoBot. Do you know GoBot?
Is that like
the fake ass?
It's the fake version. Okay.
Yeah. It's like the Panashiba instead of a Panasonic.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, I remember being so disappointed because the GoBot was like, I don't know, $5 less. Although back then, $5.
Totally.
And we did not have money. We didn't have a lot of money. But that context mattered nothing to an 8-year-old.
8.
You don't give a fuck. It was like, am I not enough for the transformer? And I said to my mom, she was at this point like used to me clearing things. I was like, hey, I need to talk to you about something. She was like, okay. And I was like, hey, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I need to clear that when I wanted a transformer, you got me a GoBot. And she was like, what? And So I like explained it and she's kind of laughing and so is my dad, but they're both like, well, we're really sorry.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, great. All right.
Done.
We're resolved.
Okay. So
That was a long answer.
it was a great answer. Brought up a lot more questions. How important do you think it is for having a beautiful, healthy, loving relationship to actually be able to bring up stuff with our family of origin and clear it?
Well, I think for a lot of people, the initial healing starts with, of course, it starts where it's safest.
Yeah.
It should.
Yeah.
I've worked with clients where all of a sudden they're like, they've discovered something and they go right to the mother wound, And I'm like, damn.
Right in.
Yeah, those are the people. Because, if you want to change a belief, the fastest way to change a belief is to do its opposite.
Yes.
So you short circuit the belief. But, if all of a sudden that is with where the origin of the fracture is, that's where it can be hardest. And especially because wounds with parents they're deep. We're talking survival, we're talking attunement and attachment. And so all that stuff can be resolved without them. I always like to say it's like closure doesn't require other people. Healing never requires other people because as soon as you think it does, then it rests on them.
Yeah.
So if it's not safe to communicate with them, then sometimes it's actually setting the boundary. I no longer want to be in communication with them. Like I've worked with a few clients, like one specifically who got a restraining order against her mother. That's deep wound stuff. Like that's like, okay, I'm giving myself the safety that no one did for me. Right. And that's the parenting oneself,
exactly,
one's own inner child, and becoming an adult.
Yeah,
So I don't think it's imperative, but I do think if the space is there, you start to shift the family system because as you change relationally with your romantic partner, or even really good friends, because you'll have friends who trigger your shit. You will have no choice but to orient to all human systems differently as the new version of you. And the system either has to reorganize around you or exit the system. So if you start to develop healthy self-expression with your partner, you can't then silence yourself with a parent. It just won't work because you have the awareness of the shifting.
You can.
You can. Yeah, you can. You can.
We were talking last night at dinner and just super transparently, this is up for me.
Yeah.
In my family of origin, Mike and I, we were talking about that show, Nobody Wants This before, right? And how healing it is, at least for me, it's such a great example of a show where people just handle stuff in real time.
Right.
It's this is up in our relationship. And rather than shove it under the rug, I'm just going to tell you the truth. Right. What a freaking revelation. So, my marriage is like that. And I'm incredibly grateful.
Same.
I married an incredibly direct man. He just is boom. So I have gotten good at meeting him there. And I'm so proud of myself because something happens and I'm boom, immediately in real time. So I've been practicing that. I didn't grow up in an environment like that. And I don't do that with my family. And I want to. But I don't.
Right.
And it doesn't feel safe to do it. And I'm going to try anyway. So I'm just holding myself accountable by saying that out loud right now. But as I was hearing you speak earlier today at the event we were at around if we are not bringing the totality of ourselves to every relationship, we are keeping others from the possibility of their totality in relationship to us. And that is true. Number one.
Yeah.
You know that, otherwise you wouldn't say it.
Fact checked. Valid.
Yeah. Number one. Number two, as someone who has a really well-honed adaptive strategy of being a chameleon, it does feel very possible to be my full self in certain places and then be just a part in other places. And so I'm curious, are there ever times when that actually is a healthy adaptive strategy to protect in an environment where it actually isn't safe to bring all of you.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't develop if it wasn't imperative.
Yeah.
Right? Like we develop those. It's always healthy to develop that in toxic relationships or places that aren't safe to self-express. So it's the right adaptive strategy. It's, can you consciously know that there are relationships you can create that create safety for one another, and then participate in a relationship that doesn't honor that, right? That's where we start to actually abandon our own integrity of our values. Because with the newfound awareness of what's possible, and your relationship with your husband offers you the contrast. And so as the awareness becomes more powerful and the body experiences this, and then you go to these other experiences, the body is like, why are we tolerating this? So if my adaptive strategy, in a more extreme sense, let's say I had a narcissistic, abusive mother, and my adaptive strategy is to fawn, to like people please and go into fawning and to actually like never disagree with her, anything like that, then that is the appropriate adaptive strategy. But at some point, the person who is that way needs to be confronted with their reality, and it's our own healing work to do that. To at least protect ourselves from those relationships. So how do I possibly be in engagement with someone like that with the awareness that health is available to me? Because in participating in it, I have to enroll in toxic relating.
Right, because you said today, there is no such thing as you being in a relationship with a toxic person. If you are in a relationship with a toxic person, you also are being toxic.
Yes, you have to be. Yeah. Because it's a toxic relationship. And you're in relationship with anything or anyone that's not you. And so just by participating now knowingly that you have to shrink to be in relationship with them or accommodate their eruptive, unpredictable behavior, your nervous system continues to get triggered.
Yeah.
And then you look at like, okay, you know, we were talking when I interviewed you for my podcast about how like the body actually doesn't know the difference between your narcissistic mother or your boss who's narcissistic and abusive and a tiger. Yeah. So you look at it like, okay, well, this is just obvious once you know it, but it's like, that means you're spilling lots of glucose and cortisol, and likely if you're in relationship with them often, high constant circulating cortisol.
Yeah. A lot of inflammation.
Right. So you're creating insulin resistance. In the research, high conflict couples, people in high conflict relationships heal slower. So they gave people a wound on their arm, and then they look at how long it takes them to heal, and it takes them longer.
Makes so much sense.
Right, because the environment is not in an experience of homeostasis. Yeah. So if you look at really though at why all of this matters, is that if you're in a relationship to anything, you're always asking, is this safe? And am I safe to be me? Mm-hmm. And if I'm not safe to be me, then, and I don't protect and stand up for myself, then in my own body, I don't feel safe because I don't have access to my own voice. If I don't have access to my voice, that's going to show up as anxiety. Yeah. Because anxiety is thought to be future-oriented, right? And depression is thought to be past-oriented. But if you actually stay in an anxious state too long and never take action, you end up depressed. And if you don't have access to your voice, you can't steer your life. If you can't steer your life, then your life might just show up as, you might believe in fate. But, you know, I always think like fate will never work for you if you're not working towards it. And you'll call it that. I think it's Carl Jung who says that. Like, you'll just have your experiences over and over again, and you'll call it fate.
Call it fate.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the purpose of long-term romantic relationship is? Other than procreation, right? Like, let's say that...
Other than making babies.
Right. Like, let's say, okay, biologically speaking, sure, we get together to make a baby. But obviously, like, that's not always true. Many people choose not to have children, you know.
Right.
Homosexual couples, all the things, right? So in modern society, like, what are we doing? Because they're hard. Right? Like
they're not always fun.
It's like really, like, they're so fun, the best ever. And also it's it's quite a bit of work. And I found being single easier in certain ways. Like I was able to just carry on with my bullshit.
Right.
Solo.
Which is kind of nice.
Like in my studio apartment, I could
Right.
just carry on. So yeah, like what are we doing? What's the purpose of them?
Well, sometimes being single is much easier. And isn't that sort of
But I can't get the stuff off the tall shelf.
No,
that's an issue.
That's the key. You need one of those little pinchy hand extenders.
I need my husband for the height.
For me, my belief is that there's no more potent vehicle for transformation than a romantic relationship. Because you're met constantly with the things that need to be resolved. And, we were joking with someone else earlier who had mentioned that like, oh, I picked someone who just happens to push all my buttons. And we're like, yeah, you need to have your buttons pushed so you can start to heal the button. And then the button's not there anymore, or you're aware of it and the way you respond to the button just gets changed. So, I always think of like behind every trigger is an opportunity for mastery. Because like in the trigger is a skill or behavior or both that you needed access to that you didn't have. And so you have a hypervigilance around something. Yeah. And instead of spending your life avoiding it or hitting the trigger and then having some sort of defensive behavior to try to protect from hurt, which also creates hurt. So you end up perpetually living in the wound. And most of us know this in our relationships. We fight about the same things. We're fighting about the wet towel on the bed, but it's not really about the wet towel, right? Sometimes it is, but it's usually about like, I don't feel like you hear me.
Oh yeah.
I don't feel like I'm important to you. And usually that thing we don't feel like is a wound that we're familiar with from childhood.
Yeah.
And so it's like unconsciously we're trying to resolve these things. So I think the purpose of romantic relationship, which I really subscribe to the idea that the deeper the commitment, the more the healing. Because by design, it brings up the friction of two humans, especially two consciously intentional people facing one another saying, we're going to bring up each other's stuff and then we're going to love each other through it. And that, to me, I don't know that there's anything more potent. At least I haven't confronted anything. I think psilocybin and ayahuasca were great, but ultimately they were just vehicles. I think of what Ram Dass says, that like you believe that something is the path to what you experience from it, but really what it does is just awaken within you what is already there.
Yes.
And so I think our partners do that. They just awaken. And sometimes actually the relationship dissolving is the gift.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Learning you can leave things and still love them.
Yeah. And I think also, to circle back to what you said before, like even the idea that a relationship that ends is a failure is just a lie, right? Like my parents were married for 24 years and then they got divorced. And like, I don't know that my dad has said this, but my mom has said like that was a successful 24-year marriage.
Yeah.
And then it was time. I don't think at the time of the divorce she felt that way, but like in retrospect.
Over time now.
Right. Like over time there's been some digestion and like it doesn't mean that ending invalidated the previous 24 years.
Right.
Right. And I think that's really beautiful. So, okay. I want to know, what is your take on non-monogamy? And like that's just actually the whole question. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the first is, there's a quote from it's Christopher Ryan's book, Sex at Dawn, which is like the Bible for polyamorous people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a great book and he has a great podcast. I don't know if he's still doing it, but it was called Tangentially Speaking. And yeah, he's a real riot. And in it, Neil Strauss has a quote where he says, you can find anyone, I think it's something like you can find anyone to justify how you want to love. And if I butchered any of that, sorry, Neil. But that's essentially the message. It's like, just find people who love like you do, and I think any relational structure, when we start to position like this one is better than another one, then we're not able to be curious about the human motivations that lead. But I'll speak to my experience. And then like when I ended my engagement at 27, I did not believe in marriage anymore.
Because of that experience, or had you not believed in it to begin with?
No, I did believe in it deeply till I ended my engagement. Okay. And it's because it all of a sudden didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense to me. I went to this therapist the week I broke up with her. I went to this therapist because she's like, look, you need to talk to someone. Like, have you talked to someone? And I was like, okay, I owe that. So I called my like employee assistance program, which of course is the least motivated therapist you could find because they're getting paid like $42 to listen to your shit.
But sometimes just expressing it is therapeutic, right?
Yeah. Oh, this was great. I walk into this guy's office and, you know, he says to me, what's your problem? Like, what's the thing happening?
What's your problem?
Like,
Great opener.
Yeah, I forget what, you know, something like that. Like, what's coming up for you?
Sure.
And I said, you know, I'm in this conundrum. And he said, well, listen, 50% of the time, people who think they're marrying the right person are wrong. And when those people get remarried and they think have figured it out, 70% of the time they're wrong. And he's like, and I was like, wow, this is a real motivational speech, you know? And then he said, when you came into this office, you already like had an idea. And he said, you know you better than anyone else, sorry. And he said, if I was to put two options in a hat and I pulled one out, which one would you hope I was holding? And I was like, man, leave. And so I left there and ended the relationship. And that had me just being like, oh, like relationships don't make sense. Like marriage didn't make sense to me. I studied then the history of them and I was like, oh, like as Stephanie Kuhn says that marriage was ultimately designed to get more in-laws.
Yeah. Right. No, it's an economic structure to build power connections.
Safety, right? So like if you marry someone from the tribe next door, now you can share resources and you have more geography. And then when agriculture started, you started to have people who owned land and people who worked on land. So then people who owned land didn't marry people who worked on land. So you started to create social structures and of course those still exist today. Oh, yeah. And so it was a way of like maintaining social structure, power, all that kind of stuff, and also trading, as you said, resources. So when I thought about that, I was like, well, that's like just linearly makes real sense. And like we never really married for love. We had affairs for love. I think Esther Perel talks about that. So I started to think like, well, then what the hell is the point? Like I'll just hook up with lots of people and we'll call it a day. But I realized that I was chasing so much self-worth in that. And I was trying to control the depth of intimacy because, of course, what lives next to love is your pain. And so when you have, quote unquote, struggles with commitment, you really just don't trust yourself with commitment. You're not afraid of commitment. You're just afraid of where commitment leads. And so there's this real opportunity to recognize that everything that is unresolved will show up as the way you relate. So if you haven't resolved betrayals, you'll date unavailable people. And really, if you date unavailable people, it means you're unavailable.
Right.
Which that's a real hard truth for people to recognize. So like I could give two people Bumble and they would end up in the exact same geography, same apartment building, same geographic radius that they're choosing from. And they'd end up with different people because of what they code as green flags and red flags and orange flags. And that's why it's like, it's by design that we would choose to avoid something that we know is going to lead to our suffering. So when someone says to me, I don't believe in marriage, I'm like, well, why? Well, because marriage leads to divorce. No investor would invest in something that's a common sort of argument. I say, well, first off, just change the definition. Because how you're defining marriage is like if you and I say the word tree, you might think of a Douglas fir and I'll think of a birch. It doesn't mean either of us are wrong. So if I'm like, I don't like trees and you're thinking of a different kind of tree, we're just missing each other. And as I said at the beginning, it's like, it's not, relationships fail because they fail to be clear about what their agreements are.
Yeah.
And so if we're avoiding marriage, we're just avoiding a way of relating. So just create a different way of relating. So what I notice, what I will say is that there's probably as many successful monogamous relationships as there are polyamorous, because both require an incredible amount of communication. And I've certainly met polyamorous people who are happy, who are thriving, who have deep communication. What I have noticed is that often, I'm going to say often because I see it, and I'd say it's true a lot, but not always, is that it's actually a way of avoiding, it creates a safety net to depth.
Right.
And
because it's like a fine mist setting on the hose as opposed to the power spray.
Right.
Of like, if you get that intensity with one person, it brings up more versus like, I'm just going to spread it around. And if I'm starting to have stuff kick up over here, then I can go over there.
Right. And we have the cultural narrative that men are designed to spread their seed and women designed to. Now, there's a truth that like women need, and after sex, women and men release oxytocin, but oxytocin lasts longer in women. And so they, by design, catch feelings because they're meant to bond with the person who might parent their child. Now, this is interesting, not to go on a tangent, but because of things like the birth control pill, which was, of course, pitched to women as part of the feminist movement, much like the torches of freedom, that women, all of a sudden, here's this available market of female smokers. Let's just show these women who are libertarians smoking, and now every woman will want to smoke. The same thing is like, here's a way to own your bodies and your sexuality. There's truth to that, of course.
Yep.
But also it's pharma using marketing to like catch something which is really important. I'm not dismissing that. But what it does is it changes the mating strategies of men and women, but especially women.
Profoundly changes your physiology.
Yeah. I mean,
that's
the white t-shirt study is really fascinating where men were told to wear a shirt for I think it's a day, and they don't wear deodorant, and then they put the shirt in a bag, and then the women smell the shirt and they say, do they like the shirt or not, the guy? And when women were on the pill, so naturally the women who would say, oh, he smells like my ex-boyfriend or something like that, what they saw was that the women who were not on the birth control pill chose men who had opposite immune systems to them. And obviously, from an evolutionary perspective, broadens immunity in the offspring, et cetera. We still are biological beings, everyone.
Animals. We're animals.
Right. But women who are on the birth control pill picked at random. And so it does change your mate selection. But all that to say is like, it actually increases the short-term mating strategies. So like one-night stands, friends with benefits, all that kind of stuff. And that the people who are more successful, the men who are more successful at short-term mating strategies, narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, and sadists are more successful at short-term mating strategies. Jordan Peterson talks about this, but that of course makes sense because they're generally more concerned about their rapport building, charisma, fitness, health, right? So by design, they expose themselves to more of these types of men, which is really fascinating when you start to think about that. So a long way around the barn, as Terry Cole would say, that I think you'll see in a polyamorous relationship structure, which can obviously look many different ways, but let's say where you have a primary and then you have some other people that you hook up with and you have agreements about that. What I'll often see is that the person leaves the primary to be monogamous with another person. So they open their relationship because they don't want to leave or they don't want to have that conversation. So they change the tier of the relationship. Often they'll change the agreements of the relationship and you'll see the other person compromise. And actually what you'll see is energetically the person compromising and abandoning what they truly desire. You can actually start to see them physiologically change. Anxious, they start to lose trust in themselves, they're abandoning themselves. Again, not always true, just sometimes true. And you'll see that one will leave for a monogamous relationship with another. So I think there's a lot of complexity to it. I don't think that one's more right than the other. In my experience, I believe that at least through the relational structures of being with someone who's open to growing together, you have a lot of opportunity to really move through the frictions of that But I could see the argument being, hey, if you're going to open up to being intimate with other people, you're going to bring frictions forward too that are going to precipitate growth.
Yep.
I just know for me, that's not my desire. Would I love to be able to just like hook up at random? Yeah. But is that an agreement that would she probably love to? Yeah. That's like a reality of life. Yeah. I don't go like, oh, then she must not love me. It's like, no.
Well, I think that's really
the human part.
Yeah, that's the human part. You know, I think about every now and again, just like, it's so funny. I was having dinner with a girlfriend of mine. I haven't seen her in a few years. And she goes, I'm pretty sure last time we were together, you told me that your dream is to move to a commune so that you and Mike could open up your marriage and like be with other people. I was like, that was definitely somebody else. I definitely never said that, because logistically speaking, like when you have your work, kids, your marriage, taking care of yourself, taking care of your house, like there's a lot going on in life already. And Mike and I are really good about carving out the time for each other. But there are some weeks where we're just like ships passing in the night. And we're like, oh, hey, hello, I see you, right? Like we really need to take the time to like be like, oh, hi.
Yeah.
Here we are. I cannot imagine the logistics of like adding in another person or several. I don't have
I love women.
The logistical
but like bandwidth. One is enough.
Yeah. Exactly. It's too much.
And I really see the connection with Kylie and I as being sacred. Yeah. And it's like anything that threatens that sacredness, that threatens our safety.
Yeah.
She is my number one priority relationally.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and my son, but like her first.
I know.
And it's like, I think of if she is not okay with something, that's the priority of the conversation first, always.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing she can bring to me that I'm going to not. It is like imperative to me that our relationship is honored and treated as sacred.
Yeah.
Because she's sacred. Women are sacred. They're portals. You guys are portals. Have we figured, like, that's fucking crazy. You are the portal to this world.
Isn't that wild?
I am not. I am.
Not directly.
I'm a key to the portal.
Yeah.
But I'm not the portal. And I think that's when we like repair our relationship with the feminine. Men repair their relationship with the feminine within themselves, and with the masculine, of course. Yeah. But the earth,
I know,
women, universe.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm making a hard left.
Big one. Let's go.
You left social media in July.
Yep.
You left Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's like an ongoing conversation for you. So it's not like, oh, this is exactly how it is and whatever. But I am curious, like, what was the impetus for that for you? What has it been like ever since? What's your relationship with it like now? As I know you are not the only one who toys with that idea, and then not everyone does it. I have a few friends who left and then came back for a variety of reasons. One of them is because mushrooms told her to come back. So, you know, I mean, like we all are on our journey, and I would stand by that direction any day. But like,
if the mushrooms tell you,
no, it was a super clear. It was a super clear directive. Yeah. So why did you leave? How do you feel now? What's your relationship with it like today?
You know, years ago, I had the feeling that I needed to leave, probably 3 years ago. And now in hindsight, I could see it was really derived from this, like, needing to get off this treadmill of, like, I started to look at my relationship more explicitly in about March, where I was like, okay, I have a lot of anxiety with social media. Why do I hire people to run it, and then they get exhausted, and it's not like I have an overtly psychologically exhausting account. Like, I'm not talking about cloud seeding and shit, you know, although that's true. I really started to look at, why do I have a resentment to something that has been actually really beneficial to my life? Right. I met my wife on Instagram. Yeah. So I'm holding all the complexity. And so I start journaling on it, and I'm like, okay, why do I resent it? Oh, I feel powerless. Why do I feel powerless? Well, no matter how much content you make, it's never enough.
It's a black hole.
The algorithm is always a mystery. You never know how it works. As soon as you think you got it figured out, they changed it. They had dancey, pointy fucking videos and, they changed the way it's oriented. So it went from being a follower, like you got the stuff from people you followed first, to then they started to see the success that TikTok had. So I'm talking more specifically in context to Instagram, but anyone who had a Facebook account really early as a business know that the algorithm shifted in one day. People went from like 25% engagement to like 3%.
Yep.
And Instagram has changed quite significantly since I started. And when I started, it was like 2013-ish, something like that. I think December of 2013. And it was a social media company started by some people who were like, hey, let's share pictures and engage with people. But then it got bought by a share-held company that said, all that stuff's great, but how do we make money? Well, we make money by monetizing people's attention. So I started to look at like, oh, okay, so I feel powerless. I feel like nothing's ever enough. I feel like it's always a mystery. They give you a bit of virality. They take it away. If you are financially dependent on it in any way, if you say the wrong thing, they could take it all away. And I started to see the overlap of it being very similar to an abusive relationship dynamic. And then I was like, oh shit, like that was, and then I was interviewing Stephen Porges, the creator of polyvagal theory.
Oh.
And he was saying, well, look, Mark, like no one is designed to be criticized 24 hours a day. And I was thinking like, oh yeah, if you are an iron conversation around a group of people around a fire in a tribe, and then we all go to bed, no one's at social risk anymore.
Right.
But if you have a profile that represents you and your thoughts and your feelings or your business or whatever, and you don't have to be a business, if you have a social media profile, what I'm saying is true. Yeah. But if you have a business or like a brand based on you or just what you love or whatever, this is amplified. So now 24 hours a day, you're available to be criticized and to have your belonging. Exile is waiting you at any possible time, a comment section going off, whatever it is. And so I started to see that like in the research on dates, when people have a phone face down on the table, they're less vulnerable because there's another world calling to them that they're always thinking about. The phone's in their pocket, same thing. So I started to think like, oh, we are like constantly being pulled by this world. And so of course we're anxious because there's a surveying, a vigilance that is happening. And at any moment we could lose everything. And then Stephen Porges said to me, not only that, but you have a non-human entity that is judging you at all times the value of what you're creating. And is it worthy?
Which is the algorithm.
Yeah. And he's like, but in a relationship, if you were in a relationship with someone where you were feeling used or abused or whatever, you would have a conversation with them and the relationship would change or you'd end the relationship. But he said, your relationship to Instagram is not relational.
Right.
Because if you try to contact, because, I was like, yeah, there's no customer service.
No.
And if they know that there are people suffering from these platforms, but they're not going to do anything about it because one, it would be admitting that they know, which I know now through leaked documents, they know. Yeah. But I just started to see like, oh, like, I don't know that I'm capable of being in a relationship with this thing based on what I've experienced. And I don't know, even if I hire someone to do it, am I just hiring them to date an abusive person? So I left in July. I was going to delete it. But then I got like thousands of messages being like, hey, can you just leave it up? Love your work.
People can go back and read past stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, I had 11 years of writing on there.
Yeah.
So
it is an archive of a body of work.
Right. And it's crazy to think that I don't own any of that. I could download it all, of course, but like I don't own any of the 1.3 million followers I'd built on the two platforms. I don't have access to any of them. So I built a business in someone else's business, which that's not good for your nervous system.
Nope.
And I was also tired of this like launch, don't. It was just like very dysregulating. There's no like residual safety in that model. And so, I was like, all right, I'm just going to leave. And when I left, I moved more to YouTube. And the reason I like YouTube is YouTube pays you for your content.
Right.
Now, it's not, You're not living off it at the rate I am.
I mean,
yeah. Some people,
Mr.
though,
Beast is.
are fucking crushing it. But people can live off it. And what I like about that model is there's a reciprocal relationship of like, thank you for your contribution.
Yep.
We make money from what you create, so we value what you create. That's not true on these other models, and that's why I don't think they have a lot of longevity. But all that to say, when you start to curate how you create content for the algorithm is shaping what art looks like. And then you start to shape what art is. So you actually step out of your authentic self-expression.
It's not art anymore.
Not that you can't work with an algorithm, of course, and not that 140 characters on Twitter force people to write differently. Right.
Yes, it's a great mental
90-second
exercise.
videos shortens your delivery. It can make you better at communication. So there's
Absolutely.
value to these things, but it's shortening attention span. Like videos
It's
are
changing our
15
brain for sure.
Right. And I just started to think like, well, we have the greatest mental health crisis we've ever had. There's more anxiety and depression than we've ever seen. It's not a fucking mystery why this is true. And we have to be in choice in relationship to these things. So since leaving, I've just really discovered that. Like, I needed to leave to know that if I ever re-enter a relationship with it, it's by choice. I could leave.
And you need agreements.
But before I did, exactly. and I need like layers of nervous system informed
100%
ways of relating.
Like you'd really need to create a system or a manifesto or like a way to do it that was in fact safe.
And for everybody who uses it on my team.
Yeah.
Because
I think
that's what
really
I noticed.
key, because we were talking, on your show about, now obviously like I've used my account in a very different way. It's much smaller. It has not been nearly as essential to my revenue. And I've never had a full-time social media person. Like we use an agency, they make the content. I'm responsible for the commenting, the end, bada bing, bada boom, we're done. Like it's very simple. But that piece around like, now I'm paying someone to be in an addictive relationship with this thing, like that's dark, right?
Right.
So I just really, I love that you're in this deeper inquiry. I think all of us listening, like, need to be asking those questions on a continual basis about everything in our life, whether it's Instagram, alcohol, right? Because you have this great thing that you say, I've heard you say it twice, about yeses and nos. Which is?
I'm
priming you now.
Cue me up. I'm ready for this. That if you don't have access to a no, your yes isn't authentic.
Yes.
It comes with small print.
Right. And is it really a yes if you don't have access to the no? The truth is no.
Right.
It's not.
It isn't. And that's codependency.
It's coercion. It's whatever. It's any
manipulation.
number of things.
It's self-abandonment.
Yes.
But either way, you're not in an authentic, true, like if I say yes to a partnership with Kylie, but I don't have access to say no to the relationship, then our relationship is not based on truth.
Right.
It's based on a prison.
Yeah.
And that's what most often relationships are based on. Yeah. I can't leave.
Right.
Or if you can't leave, then are you staying? Right. And either way, then that means I'm staying out of duress, even though it's by choice. But that lack of access to discernment is really that there needs to be some form of, I want to say trauma, but there's like access to choice. And there's that saying that the opposite of trauma is choice.
Yes, it is.
So it's like, if you're choosing something, that means you could choose not it.
Right.
And that recognition is important. And I also say to people, like, it's better to say no to a yes than yes to a no.
Wait. Okay. It's better to say no to a yes than yes to a no. Yes, totally.
Yeah, because a no to a yes teaches you what a yes is. A yes to a no puts your life in a different place,
right,
where you don't want to be.
Yeah.
One at least serves you in the direction of where you want to go, and the other one actually just keeps you not in that space. And we can feel the heaviness of that.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. This has been so great. Thank you so much. I do want to ask you a million more things, so we'll just have to have you come back.
Love it.
Another
That'd be great.
time.
That'd be great.
Okay. So one final thought question, which is like, what is one thing that each of us can do to nurture love in our lives on a daily basis, to make our lives more loving?
Well, I think it's all about rituals. That idea of what is self-love, what is loving oneself, is thought to be like, oh, it's like bubble baths and chocolate, and those are definitely great. But it's really, to love oneself is to love one's choices. And if you don't like your choices, you won't like who you are. And so the way you build those practices is by like, what do you do when you wake up? And I've really learned more the value of this since having a child, because
it's everything.
Man, I thought I had I realized how much time I had before.
Like, what were we
I doing?
I thought I was so busy.
I know.
I have no idea what I did in my life up until the age of 34 when I became a mom.
I'm 45.
Just frittering away.
I don't know what I did. I created content. I did that. Yeah. But I really started to implement the practices of waking up, looking at the sun.
Yes.
Putting my feet on the earth.
Yes.
If I can, working out if there's like access to that, which there usually is. I prioritize that. I prioritize getting up before my wife and my son so I can do all these things, because as soon as...
Which is a bold move when you have a toddler. I mean, that's early.
Oh, yeah, it is. It is. I've become a morning person.
Discipline.
But it's like the time, if I don't do it, I resent that I haven't done it. I resent them.
Yeah.
Because now they're up and I can't do my things.
Right.
And, my wife is great.
I'm now resenting you for being awake.
Right. Right. It's so ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I tell
Only because we've been there at our house.
Well, my wife is great, because if I'm like working out and he gets up earlier,
right,
she's like, how many more sets do you have?
Yeah. Great.
And then if I can, cold plunge.
Yeah.
Because for me, cold plunging is about it builds the awareness that your body is saying you're going to die, and you're not.
You're not. It's the best
and
nervous system. Like, it's such a good tool. Not so great just if you're listening and you're female and you've suffered from adrenal fatigue. Not so awesome.
Yeah, I could see that.
However, so good for increasing our capacity to be with discomfort while also learning to feel safe there.
I always think like you can do hard things. You can do hard things. And I do like 3 minutes at 44 degrees and I'm like, I'm going to die.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just like, whoa. And when I get out, I'm just like, holy, life is amazing. And I'm proud of myself. And it's like the beginning of my day. And I've already gotten everything. It's kind of like I would be chasing those things if I don't do them first in the morning.
It's just downhill from there.
Yeah.
Where does coffee fit in? Do you drink coffee?
Yes.
At what point in the morning routine?
I make it right when I wake up.
Speaking as an addict.
Yeah. When do you do heroin?
I'm only addicted to coffee. It's my one addiction.
Same, actually. But
all other vices.
I actually now put in half or a third calf and decaf. I just put both beans in.
Weaning.
That's how I do it all the time now, because my wife wants caffeine and I could go decaf. It doesn't really matter to me, but I don't drink enough that it's like too much.
Yeah.
So right away in the morning, I make a coffee.
And you have it right then.
Yeah, I like bring it into the gym.
Now I'm just like into the minute details of your morning.
No, I bring it in the gym with me.
Okay, and you kind of like sip.
I tend to fast till about noon or 1.
Yep.
Almost every day. I do a 24-hour fast once a week.
Yep. Nice.
I'm going to do a 5-day.
Cool.
After November 5th, 16th, I'm going to do a 5-day.
Amazing. You're going to feel bionic.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it impacts like A1C, glucose, cholesterol, all the metabolic stuff, because I'm just so fascinated by all of it.
It's so
like, I can't believe I spent my life thinking like, oh, what happens if? I'm like, no, do everything that prevents everything. Like, why not just become so fit that if anything happens to me, that's just life.
Well, yeah, you had shared.
But I might as well do everything I can.
You had shared yesterday that becoming a dad was your impetus to like get in the best shape of your life, which is very unusual. Most people just completely let themselves.
Yeah.
I even hate to say the phrase "let themselves go," but like health is not always the biggest priority. I mean, when I had my baby, my first one, I was like eating potato chips in the middle of the night nursing because I just was hanging on by a thread.
For sure.
Which is fine. I have great compassion for myself. It's fine. But it's cool that you did that. And like, why did you do that?
Well, I had a friend who was like, oh, you're going to get dad bod. And I was like, oh, And I was reading about how like someone had sent me how dad bod was a normal response to having a kid because your estrogen levels go higher and your testosterone drops.
Yeah.
Which if you're co-sleeping makes you more attuned.
Sure.
Which is really fascinating.
Yeah. So that you're not rolling over on your baby.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
so
good
you're like
for the body.
and you know what's so exactly, and what's so fascinating about like co-sleeping parents, but especially mothers, is that when the baby starts to come out of deep sleep, the mother starts to come out of deep sleep. So they're communicating on this whole other fucking 5D.
Body is amazing.
Honestly, when I see my wife's relationship with our son, and I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe you changed the consistency of your milk for what he needs. Like, you are amazing. You're a miracle.
Yeah.
And it's just like, my mind is always being shattered by these, like the amount of wiring that occurs with mother-child.
Yeah.
And my friend Mark Wolin said to me, I was like, yeah, the dad, like really important role. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, wait, what? And he was like, well, the dad is important. He said, but the mother prepares the neural architecture of the child for the world. And then the father takes the child into the world.
That's beautiful.
And that's so great. Mark Wolin wrote It Didn't Start With You.
Oh, yes.
Why It's Not Your Fault, which is an incredible book. He's an incredible teacher. And I was just like, oh, that's so fat. Now that, of course, there's different relationship dynamics and single moms and single dads. And listen, a lot of people get really reactive to all that. It's just like in an ideal world, which actually is why I think like the family system in its ideal is like, it's not like people who are apart and love each other are worse than people who are together and love each other. People who are together and don't like each other and people who are apart and don't like each other are both highly dysfunctional to
100%.
child development. But yeah, my friend said this to me, you're going to get dad bod. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'm learning about this. I was like, what happens if I totally flip that shit and I get in the fittest shape of my life because of the love for my son?
Yeah.
So then I was like, what would that mean? So I started to double down on all the things. And
So cool.
honestly, I feel better than I've ever felt.
How much better is parenting because you are cultivating your own internal energy reserves? I mean, eating potato chips in the middle of the night was like not the most optimal choice. Oh my God. I would eat like a bag a day.
Miss Vicky, salt and vinegar. Get out of here.
No, I did like that. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Luckily, it was great fuel for all the breast milk. So it's fine. But I love that. I love that. It's inspiring. It flips things on its head. So beautiful. Where should people come and find you? I know you have an amazing book called Liberated Love that you wrote with your amazing wife. So they should get that for sure. You have a Substack.
Yes.
Where else?
I have a Substack where I just write 4 articles a month that are about different parts of the human experience and all over the map. And I have a podcast, the Mark Groves Podcast, and have a YouTube channel where I dive into some subjects more in a longer form. And then I do have an Instagram for my podcast called Mark Groves Podcast.
Great.
And I have a membership called Aligned. And you can find all of it, markgroves.com. The membership is markgroves.com/aligned. And that's where all my courses are and a community of like incredible people all looking to use the frictions of their life to get aligned.
Nothing better.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to this episode of Plenty. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe, leave a rating, leave a review. That's one of the best ways that you can ensure to spread the abundance of plenty with others. You can even text it to a friend and tell them to listen in. And if you want even more support to expand your abundance, head over to katenorthrup.com/breakthroughs, where you can grab my free money breakthrough guide that details the biggest money breakthroughs from some of the top earning women I know, plus a mini lesson accompanying it with my own biggest money breakthroughs and a nervous system healing tool for you to expand your abundance. Again, that's over at katenorthrup.com/breakthroughs. See you next time.